One of the biggest problems that I see all the time is that people just they don't really know how to teach. And yeah, you might think, well, I know how to teach. People get it and they understand. And I'm not talking about teaching inside of your programs. I'm talking about teaching in the form of marketing, teaching in your content. So this means when you're doing a webinar or you have a piece of content and you want to teach your audience something, but you also want them to be interested. You want them to be engaged. You want them to also want to take the next step with you. It's a different form of teaching than what you're going to be delivering inside your program. Before someone buys the teaching that we do, it has to be different than you're a teacher in a classroom and you're teaching material that people have willingly signed up for to learn. When you're trying to stop the scroll, get picked up in algorithms, get people to click on an email and go watch it, and then to stay there, it requires a different form of teaching. And inside of this episode, this will be a rerun episode that we ran a while ago, but I wanted to run it again because as we bring in new batches of people and students inside of Built to Convert, I realized that people don't understand the difference between when we teach in our courses and when we teach in our content. And there's a big difference. And this episode will help. So if you're interested, well, keep on listening.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today's episode is recorded at night. It is a Thursday night for me, and decided to just record an episode. So if you're watching on YouTube, that's why the shadows are a little harsh. Got no natural light, all artificial light, and it's not really a well-lit room. So anyways, if you're here listening on the podcast, you probably won't notice the difference. So with that being said, today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the art of teaching using metaphor, story, and examples. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this today is because I just hosted a 2-day workshop all about launch messaging. So it's a free workshop that we run from time to time, all about how to dial in your messaging for launching, or how to do it with launches. And there's 3 main elements that you want to use. And one of them is something we call backing it up. So when we teach, we want to back up our teachings. And there's a reason why this is really important. One of the things I like to tell people, or I do on these workshops, is that one of the ways I started making more money and growing the business was just simply by becoming a better teacher. And when I became a better teacher, I started to be able to learn how to create demand, how to make my teachings flow more, how to make people understand it, visualize it, they can see it. I think a lot of times we run into problems because we want to deliver information and we teach and we give out all of this stuff. One of the things I always say, and I know other people say it too, is, well, when you do that, you risk overwhelming your audience. And if we go one layer deeper, it's not that we're really overwhelming our audience. I mean, we are, but what we're doing is we're making a distortion, or I think distortion is the right way, in their head of how to actually integrate. It's a problem of integration. So when you overwhelm them, they don't see how they can go from point A to point Z. And so becoming a better teacher is understanding where your audience is, how they're going to process it, what they're going to be thinking, how do you teach and get them to understand that it makes sense, and how do they integrate it in their head visually as they move forward. So one of the reasons why this is so important is because if your teachings are something that is a little new or different, or goes against the grain, or whatever it may be, or even if it's just a complex issue, if that's what it is, even if it's just a complex issue, we could do something like, if it's complex, well, here's basically what happens. If it's a complex issue, or it's something that goes against someone else's knowledge or what they think is right, it's going to cause problems. And basically, here's what happens. And I know I'm probably not making any sense, because it's not even making sense in my head as I'm saying the words. So, so here's what happens. When you go and you teach something, what's going to happen is your audience is going to process it automatically. They're going to automatically start processing that information. Their subconscious is going to tell them, this is great, I like it, stay, leave, make sense, doesn't make sense, right? So their subconscious is going to start to automatically process that information. And what happens is if their subconscious, but in that processing phase, what's going to happen is the subconscious is going to compare it to what they already know. So if I said to you, how-to content is one of the worst ways to build an audience online, that's a teaching, right? I just taught you something. I just made a statement. But what's going to happen is your subconscious is going to automatically take that and compare it to what they believe, what they think is true, what they think is right. And it's going to make a decision, does this make sense or not? The next phase after yeah, it makes sense is, how does this apply to me? How does this apply to us? That's usually the way the mind works when it comes to teachings. So what happens is if I just say, hey, how-to content is one of the worst ways to build an audience, your subconscious is going to compare it against what it thinks is right. And if what you think is right is the opposite, is not incongruent with what I'm teaching, there's going to be a butting of heads. It's not going to work. The subconscious will be like, nope, I don't like this. No, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. So that's the way it's going to appear to them, is like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, this doesn't make any sense. However, if I said how-to content is one of the worst ways to build an audience, look at Gary Vaynerchuk, Simon Sinek, Brene Brown, they all have amazing audiences without using how-to content. I removed the block. I removed the conflict. So now the subconscious mind, without even thinking about it, goes, oh, instead of saying that's not true, now says, oh my God, I never realized that before. I never knew that. I never saw that. That's right. That's correct. So now what we do is, because we became a better teacher, we remove the conflict between the two different thoughts. The other thing that's really amazing with this is that when we start to back things up using story and metaphor and examples, even if there's not a conflict of belief, or even if there's not a conflict or a disagreement on if it's right or wrong or good or bad, even if that's not happening, it actually helps the mind integrate the teachings easier or understand the teachings easier. Okay. So integration is really what we're talking about here. And that's the art of using story and metaphor and teachings and examples, is that when you start to use those three things with your teachings, you become a more powerful teacher. There is no, you limit the amount of responses your audience is going to have of this is wrong, bad, not right. This person doesn't know what they're talking about. You start to remove a lot of that. Again, they integrate it and understand it a lot easier, but you're also just more engaging. And so the things that I like to do is, when I use story, I always talk about either a story of how I've done that teaching in the past, or here's the teaching I want to give you. Here's how it worked out in my life. And I usually talk about, here's where I was before the teaching, here's where I was after, and here's how I integrated it, is usually the way that I like to do it. But when you have to look for stories where the concept of your teaching was used as well. So not only can you use your own story, but you're going to find other stories of when that concept was used. So let me give you an example. I talk a lot about how you should not survey your audience, and you should just let the behavior dictate and tell you, and the data tell you what is working and what's not. Okay. So I have that teaching in one of my presentations. So what I do is I say, don't survey, don't guess, look at behavior and look at data. So what I'm doing is saying, okay, where else have I heard a story or an example or something where someone or a company or someone has not relied on someone's opinion, which is what a survey is, and when they actually relied on hard data and they did really well. And I talk about the whole story of Vuori. And so Vuori, the clothing company, went into REI. This is the short version of the story. Went into REI, and just by like a Hail Mary, they're kind of like the last group to get into this test group of 10. And then REI tested all of the 10 brands, or however many there were, of athletic wear for men at their store, and Vuori outsold all of them. So my question to you is like, well, why didn't Vuori just ask their customers which one they would buy and get their opinion on which one they would buy it. Instead, what they did is they got hard data on which one actually sold more. And then they started carrying Vuori as their exclusive, one of their exclusive brands inside of their store after that. So they didn't do that by asking people what they wanted. They did that by hard data, right? So that's the story I tell people when I say you shouldn't use surveys. So instead of just saying, oh, you shouldn't use surveys and moving on, I say you shouldn't use surveys. Here's the reason why. And here's a story like when Vuori went into REI and da-da-da-da-da. And now people go like, oh my God, that makes sense. I see it. I get it. It also drives a little bit of social proof, right? But I also use story as well. Like one time I talk about connection and how connection is necessary for sales. And then as soon as I say that, I tell this story about how someone attended one of my webinars. They or didn't even attend one of my webinars, but they love me, love the content. And they ended up buying because they connected with me. And it was a whole story I tell, right? But that's a story where the literal teaching was happening in real life. So I always like to teach and use the story to back things up. And it's very similar to metaphor. Metaphor is a little bit different. Because it's not a real story. It's not. It's their analogies, it's metaphors, whatever. Are really great at being able to prove points. So one of the things I'll say is like how-to content's one of the worst ways to build an audience. Or I'll say like information doesn't create sales. And then I'll say that's like trying to get an encyclopedia at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. It just doesn't happen. And that's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor where I take the concept of what's going on and apply it into a different situation or a different context. And now it doesn't make sense. So metaphors and analogies are great for that. So the what I like to do is I like to look at what is my teaching doing? What's the high level concept of what's happening with my teaching? So what I do is I literally look at it and go, what's the high level concept of what's going on here? So if I said something like, giving away your best information doesn't guarantee sales. Let's say that was one of my teachings. I would say, what's at the high level concept going on here? I'd say, okay, well, information equals results. Information equals good. And I have to ask myself, okay, where does that concept not work? When delivering more information equals results, where does that not work? And then I went to New York Times bestseller list. And I first asked myself, well, what has a lot of information in it? And I was like, well, dictionaries, encyclopedias. Okay, great. Encyclopedia, it's a book. What did we try to do with books? New York Times bestseller list. I'm like, okay, great. And so now, because I took the high level concept, applied it to a different context, it shows the flaws in the logic. Now people go like, oh yeah, I guess that is kind of like that. And then I'll even go further and I'll say like, well, what do the best New York Times bestsellers do? What do they all have? Perspective shifting content that connects, talking about beliefs. They get you to see things differently, shift your perspective. People go, oh my gosh, yeah, that's true. So it shows the truth in my teachings while showing the flaws in the older belief or teaching. Hopefully that makes sense. So metaphors and analogies are a great way to also back up your teachings. Again, what backing up does is it allows you to get the subconscious mind to go like, yes, I understand that. That makes sense. Okay, got it. Okay. And then the other one is just using examples. So if you can find people that have the social proof. So like I like using people like Gary Vaynerchuk, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, Mel Robbins, because they are all examples of people who don't do the stuff that I teach, right? Or sorry, they do the stuff that I teach. They don't do the old stuff like how-to content and things like that. So they're the perfect counterexample. So every time I teach, I'm using them in my teachings. Now, you have to understand also, this is really, really powerful. Even if your teachings are not statements, like I know a lot of the examples I was giving are statements like how-to content's not the best way. Information doesn't sell. However, you can use them with normal teachings too. Okay. So if you're going to, like, let's just say you are going to do a tutorial or something like that, or teach something. For example, for me, if I wanted to create a video and it was titled how to create engaging content, and step number 1 was like how to create a title, I would say, okay, here's how to create a really effective title. We want to start with the identity. So how course creators, and then the benefit, are creating engaging content, and then the pain point, without spending a lot of time or in only 5 minutes. So I have 3 different triggers in there: the identity, the benefit, and the pain. So how course creators can create engaging content in 5 minutes or less. So I might teach that on a webinar, let's say, right? So like, let's say, here's the process, here's the steps, here's how you create an effective title. Okay. That's an actual teaching. It is more or less a tutorial or a step-by-step sort of formula or process or whatever. There's structure to it. It's not a statement. It's an actual, just here's how you do it. So what I would do is I would probably in that case use an example. I would say, here's an example of one of Gary Vaynerchuk's, and I would go through his videos or someone's videos that has a lot of views. And I would say, who used this formula, and say, here's the video here, here, and here, all over 1 million views. What do they have? They have the identity, they have the benefit, and then they have the pain. Here you go, here you go, here you go. Example, example, example. Now the subconscious mind goes, oh my God, I can see it live in action. I get it. I can do this. And obviously it's working because these people are getting the results. So now you have a much more effective teaching going on because you use that example. So they can happen, again, they can happen in your normal, everyday, standard, traditional teachings. They can happen in your statement teachings, your thought reversal teachings, whatever you want them to be. But again, what most people do is they don't ever use those things. I almost look at myself as a lawyer trying to prove that what I'm teaching you actually works. I'm not just going to assume that you're going to believe me because, I'm the person talking. I want to make sure that you understand it. I want to make sure that I prove it. I want to make sure that your subconscious, I'm not fighting your subconscious. I'm helping your subconscious, building a deeper understanding with your subconscious. That's what we're trying to do here. So hopefully this was, I know it's a shorter episode. Hopefully it was very value adding for you guys, brought some clarity for you. This is one of the ways I just become a better teacher, make more powerful presentations, launches, webinars, all of that stuff, live launches, everything by using these concepts. Now, when you watch one of our trainings, you'll notice I use them all the time. So in our 2-day workshop that we did, it's maybe two hours of training, an hour each day. I probably use like 9 different elements like that. The examples, the metaphors, the analogies, and the stories used a lot over those 9 days. And so as I start to teach, I start to become more effective because I'm using these all over the place. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully you guys liked it. And if you did, leave us a review on iTunes. I'd be so grateful for that. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested. And thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.